Indeed, because within a few days of the Irish saying no to the Lisbon Treaty, you had rammed that treaty through the British Parliament, and you've done it breaking a specific... You see, I said you were popular. You did it breaking a specific manifesto pledge that you would give the British people a referendum on the constitutional treaty. Shame on you, Prime Minister, for doing that. You have devalued democracy in our country. You have devalued the trust that voters have got in you as a British Prime Minister. But of course we know the reason why. The reason why is that we would have voted no. You said in your speech that none but those on the extremes oppose European Union. Well, that may be right amongst professional career politicians, but a clear majority of the British people want us to have friendship and free trade with the European Union, but do not want to be members of this political union. You cannot continue against public opinion to build this European Union. If you do it against the will of the people, you are storing up enormous social and political problems for the future. Please, please, let the peoples of Europe decide their destiny. Don't have it done in parliaments like this and parliaments like Westminster. It won't work. And as far as the economy is concerned, you've told us that somehow you're the economic guru. You're the man that can save the world. Well, I remember very well your first big act as Chancellor, when you sold 400 metric tons of gold on the world's exchanges at $275 an ounce. At today's valuation, that would be $10 billion higher. But it isn't just the fact you got it wrong, because we can all get it wrong. It was the fact that you announced in advance how much you were going to sell and on what day you were going to sell it. It was an error so basic that the average A-level economics student, even in these educationally devalued times, wouldn't have done. To add to that, you've destroyed our private pension system. You took away from the Bank of England its ability to regulate the banks and gave it to the tick-box bureaucrats at the FSA in Canary Wharf. And we haven't heard an apology. Your government has apologised for the Amritsar massacre. You've apologised for slavery. You've apologised for virtually everything. Will you please apologise for what you did as British Chancellor, and then perhaps we might just listen to you. Thank you.
Farage.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. If this is European democracy in action, as we've heard this morning, I suggest we have a rethink. We're told that, as a result of the European elections, Mr Juncker here is the nominee. Well, I can tell you that absolutely nobody in the United Kingdom knew that when they voted in the European election, it had anything to do with the next nominee. And the truth of it is, your voters, actually in your countries, didn't realise what this process was. Mr Juncker's name did not appear on any single ballot paper. And the whole thing has been the most extraordinary stitch-up. I mean, the loser, Mr Schulz, gets the consolation prize of being an unprecedented second-term president in the Parliament. I mean, it's all just a pretence that we're increasing democracy. Now, of course, I'll be told, yeah, but hang on a second. The European Parliament, the elected bit of the European institution, did actually have a say and did decide whether Mr Juncker was to become Commission President or not. Well, let's just have a think about the process we're about to engage in. We're all going to be asked to vote, and we've got one candidate to vote for. I mean, it's like good old Soviet times, isn't it? Surely democracy means you get rather more of a choice than one. But I think far worse than that, it is going to be a secret ballot. I mean, you really couldn't invent it, could you? Hard on the heels of a European election, our voters are not going to know how any of us have voted. And I would say to you, Mr Schulz, as President of the Parliament shouldn't vote in secret. The whole point of being publicly elected representatives is we should be held accountable for our actions to our own voters, and to be asked to vote in secret, I think it's a huge insult to voters. Everybody, David Cameron had you worried for a bit. You thought he was even a Eurosceptic, but it's okay. You've had a quiet word with him, and the real David Cameron was back. Whatever happened to the veto? No more vetoes anymore. Indeed, Mr Cameron is now actively supporting this quite despicable pact, this plan to destroy and humiliate nation-states that do not live up to a Germanic view of how economies ought to be run. Now, I must say, I thought the weekend's proposals from the German finance ministry that came out, suggesting that a European commissioner and his staff occupy a big building in Athens and take over the running of the country, a Gauleiter, some may say, I thought it must be a joke. I thought it can't, I mean, possibly even this EU could not sink to those depths. But of course it was just a negotiating position. And what we've now got for Greece is diplomacy at gunpoint. It's the kind of strategy that Palmerston used against Athens back in the 19th century. I've often asked myself the question, why would a successful country that's enjoyed 1,000 years of independence give up its right of self-government to the unelected non-entities that we see sitting before us this morning? And the answer that comes back from the Foreign Office and the great of the good is that we must have influence in Europe. We must have a seat at top table and we can change things. And we've done our best to prove what good Europeans we are. We go on paying you £50 million a day. We've helped the Euro bailout fund, even though we didn't join the currency, thank goodness. We've given you 80% of the fish stocks that swim in our waters. Your fleets can come and take that from us. And we've applied every directive you've given us absolutely to the letter, all of it to gain influence. In fact, Nick Clegg is so deluded, he still thinks we can take the lead in Europe. When a British Prime Minister goes to a summit with a very modest proposal to protect a uniquely important British industry, a snarling President Sarkozy tells him where to go, with German approval of course, and we find ourselves without a friend in the room, some influence. Well, you've decided to head off on the Titanic towards economic and democratic disaster, and we're now in a lifeboat outside the Titanic, but we're threatened by a bow wave that is going to come and engulf us if we're not careful, and it's retribution, and we've heard the language of retribution this morning. Financial markets legislation is going to be imposed upon Britain, and we will have no influence whatsoever over any of it. Something changed though on Friday. Mr Cameron may not know it, but we are now on course. Britain is going to make the great escape. We're going to get out of this union. We'll be the first European country to get our freedom back. I suspect many others will follow. And then what we'll have is our democracy back, our liberty back, and we'll have influence in the world as you lot head for disaster. It is going to happen. Mr Barroso, you told us this morning that the European Union is an inspiration, and whilst you admitted to there being one or two little economic problems, you made it perfectly clear that jobs and growth were to follow, that everything's going well. In fact, you painted a vision that a new period of European renewal is upon us. Now, as a former communist yourself, you probably remember the old Soviet leaders getting up to give their speeches and telling everybody that there was a record harvest, or that tractor production figures were terribly good. And they, of course, believed that history was on their side. In fact, President Khrushchev got up and said to the West, "We will bury you." You know, so much did he believe in his own union. Well, now, of course, we look back at that and we laugh. And I think in our tomorrows, people will look back at you and they will say, how on earth did this unelected man get all of this power? And how did Europe's political class, sitting in this room, decide that the community method should replace national democracy? I think people will look back in astonishment that we've surrendered democracy. But
rebelling against the establishment. You're a total creature of the establishment.
please.
Stockbroker,
No.
college.
No, I wasn't a stockbroker.
Shire Tory background.
I worked in the metals business. Nothing wrong with that, is there?
I'm not saying
Do you know
there's
something?
anything
I tell you what. I tell you what. I tell you what. You can say. I tell you what's not a con. Unlike Miliband, Clegg, Cameron, and virtually all of the others, at 18 years old, I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and went to work. And I worked for 20 years. You know, paid my taxes. In the MREM, my own company, and employed people. I've worked in the real world. I know what it's like to go through tough times. I know what it's like to deal with bureaucracy. And none of them, frankly, have ever had a job.
Most of the angst in this country right now is the result and consequence of a financial crisis. If you're an ex-financier...
No, I'm a metal trader. Try again.
You're a trader, you're a man of the city, and it's the city that caused the woes that you're trading on and trying to blame on immigration.
you want to buy some lead?
I
Or
don't
zinc?
buy any lead off you.
I've got
I'm trying to
copper,
say you're
aluminium, I don't mind.
deflected anger at people's economic insecurity at Europe and immigration.
I'm sorry, there is one way in which I will agree with you, and that is that the Eurozone crisis has led to many more people coming to this country, and I suspect between now and the general election, the numbers coming to Britain will go up even further, so desperate is the financial crisis in Italy and Spain and Portugal and Greece. We have, yes, of course, we had huge problems from 2008, as many Western world countries did, because well, we've mismanaged it completely. We've torn up the rule book. A rule book that had been there since the Wall Street crash, we tore it up. Gordon Brown gave away control of the banks that had been run by the Bank of England since 1694 and gave it to a bunch of tick-box bureaucrat failures down in Canary Wharf. That is why the banking crisis was as bad as it was. And you'll notice countries like Canada or Australia did not have a banking crisis as we did because they kept proper rules.
In Middleton, you're making a big play that you might win this and do really well, but the truth is, if you lose, you'll see that your appeal is not, your Shire Tory appeal, your free market appeal does not run to a place like Greater Manchester, home of the trade union movement and the cooperative movement.
I just think you're not seeing the bull. You know, we are growing hugely in the north of England. We've come second in the last 5 northern by-elections. This is our best by-election yet to date in the north. You know, I'm absolutely confident this will be our best ever score in a by-election in the north of England. And let's see where that puts us in relation to the Labour Party. All I'm saying is this: I accept it's a mountain to climb. Labour are well entrenched, they're well organised, they're well funded, and all of those things. But we've got some momentum with us.
Wake up, go to bed with Nigel Farage, wake up with Ed Miliband.
Quite funny by his standards, I must say. You know, I'll give him that. It wasn't bad, but it's nonsense. It's a desperate attempt by Cameron to try to hold on to that Tory vote that's left with him. A third of it's gone since the election. Between now and the election, it's likely that Ed Miliband will match that referendum pledge. Then he won't even be able to say that.
Are you a free marketeer?
Do I believe in free markets, or do I believe in communism? I prefer free markets. Do I think free markets need to have limits? I mean, even the most ardent free marketeer believes that a government should have a central bank, should have a fiscal policy and a monetary policy, and I would extend that by saying we must be mad not to have our own labour market policy and to have opened the doors to unconditional numbers of people. May be good for big employers, I accept that, but the social consequence of that has not been worth the price.
You have no problem with the NHS.
And the argument has to be that unless we adopt a sensible, positive immigration policy, unless we get some degree of integration and assimilation within our towns and cities, we are going to live in a very divided society. So UKIP doesn't want that.
So you aren't happy with Britain as Britain is today?
I'm personally fine. You know, I'm personally fine. I have no problems at all. And I'm sure that's how everybody who sits in the House of Commons feels. But it's not like that for millions and millions of people. And yes, you've made the point about the changing communities and language, but it goes far deeper than that. You know, there are millions of people out there who are now earning either the minimum wage, the numbers of those have doubled since 1999, but also people working in a whole range of businesses, people in the construction industry, lorry drivers, you name it. You know, their take-home pay is now exactly the same as it was 10 years ago, or perhaps lower, and that is because of wage compression. You know, we have opened ourselves up to the uncontrolled free flow of migrant labour, and that has made people worse off.
If you end up with a bunch of MPs on the day after the next election, if there's another hung parliament, and either Labour or Tory approach you for what is called in parliamentary terms a confidence supply arrangement, not a coalition, but a confidence and supply arrangement, what would be your price?
Oh, well, the price would be a full, free and fair referendum on our continued membership of the European Union, the opportunity to get our country back, and for that to happen quickly. You see, the whole problem with the current Cameron strategy is he's trying to kick this into the long grass. So if we believe what David Cameron says and support him, it'll be 3 years before we get that referendum. A referendum, incidentally, in which he will campaign, regardless, for us to remain a member.